Dianna, I think everything that we're going to be talking about tonight comes from your list of things that turn you on, because we're going to dive into some of your selections for some movies to maybe watch with the family to, I guess, push a little bit of sex positivity, to push a little bit of feminism and the, you know, oh so evil queer agenda, so that when you are in that moment where it's the Friday after Thanksgiving and you have been watching football all day and you're sick of being around family and you just want everybody to shut the hell up, and somebody is like reaching for an old copy of White Christmas and you just can't fucking watch that movie again. These are some hot takes. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump into it. What was the first movie you wanted to talk about tonight?
Yeah, I am really happy with the 2018 movie Booksmart. I think it is a beautiful twist on the sort of coming of age movies. My friend described it to me as like these two teen girls go off and try to do their own Superbad, but it's not misogynistic in that way. It is these two teen girls who realize on the night before graduation that they have done all the like book smart things. They have gotten good grades, they've gotten into good colleges and stuff, and they completely missed out on the partying side of high school. They missed out on those teenage adventures. And so they go out and try to seek those out, and it turns into this entire bumbling night of comedies of errors. They get taken to the wrong places. They end up like exploring different things and getting into some dangerous situations, and the entire time it's about this friendship between two girls who are heavily supportive of each other, have an open, talkative relationship that talks about everything from masturbation to their crushes to the sexual experiences they have or have not had. And so one of the girls is a lesbian, the other one is her very enthusiastic straight ally. And there's one like sex scene in the entire thing, but the way it's played is for jokes really, and it's still very sex positive, even though it's not a the scene is very like cringe, but it's still very sex positive. There's no like, oh my gosh, you're going to ruin your life by doing this.
So a non-rapey, female-centered Superbad is kind of like a pretty effective pitch all on its own. But talk about why this was a pick for you when it comes to sex positivity. What was some of the modeling that you saw, or what worked in that movie that you feel like might be worth sort of sneaking in when you've got like family sitting around that you might want to maybe trick into learning something?
Yeah, it's part of the joke of the movie is that the lesbian in the relationship in the friendship has never had sex, never experienced anything. She's a virgin. And so it's about her learning like how to as a lesbian, as a queer woman, which is really fascinating to me because that's not a story that gets told. That like, you know, queer people don't just come out and just know how to do these things. We have to actually educate them.
Sure.
Like how straight people like don't just automatically know. And stuff. And so it's a fun twist on that lack of sex education being a source for humor, and a source for growth in a lot of ways, where she learns about herself and about what she likes and doesn't like, which is pretty sex positive.
No, and I'm glad that we're starting here because we didn't talk about this before the show, but this is actually a movie that I saw in theaters with my mother. And if I had tried to pitch her on anything that was sort of sex positive or queer oriented or that had that in the tagline, it would have been at best an uphill battle. It probably would have gotten shut down right away. But she was excited to see it. She, I think, maybe even brought me to that picture. And as you're watching it, it doesn't feel preachy. It didn't feel like they were pushing an agenda. It was just a movie. And the people in that movie were having healthy conversations about sex. We're learning and growing and developing as people. I mean, it worked really well for me on that level.
Yeah, it's definitely one that, like, the next time I go and visit my brother and sister-in-law, we usually end up sitting down and watching a movie together in the evening after the nieces have gone to bed. I can see us sitting down and watching that movie together and getting a laugh out of it, which is really good for, like, a good family time movie.
Yeah, and I don't know how resonant this narrative is for everybody, but I just know in my family there's always that thing around the holidays where it's
Mhm.
like everybody wants to be together, but nobody really wants to do anything or say anything. We have nothing in common. We've already like sort of taxed whatever connections or whatever like utility we get out of being around each
Yeah.
other, but we still want to try and figure out a way to make it work. And
Mhm.
that's usually when, somebody goes to put on like a random episode of Breaking Bad or something. And it's like, that's not a bad show, but that's not working for me here. So I love that recommendation.
Mhm.
What else do you think would work for when the whole family is like coming together to sit and watch a movie at the same time?
Um, the other one that we have on the list is one that's a little bit controversial, but I think would actually spur a lot of conversation.
Yeah,
Was Promising Young Woman.
perfect. I love it.
Yeah. It is a movie about a young woman who has dropped out of medical school and decides to spend her time trying to get revenge on men, basically for her friend's rape during medical school. So it's dealing with a heavy topic, but it's doing so in a way that is incredibly intriguing, it to the point where it almost becomes a thriller in points, and it's a very interesting, well acted movie that takes one of my favorite things about the movie is the casting, because it takes all these
Yeah.
guys who are known for playing nice guy characters and casts them in the role of these like lecherous men.
Yeah, it
And it's
sleazes them
so
up a little bit. Yeah.
it's so fascinating. And that's one that I think would definitely get conversation started among family in a lot of ways. It's not necessarily one that like young kids can watch, but it's definitely
Sure,
one
fair
where
to say.
like you can watch with your adult cousins and then talk about as a group.
Yeah, yeah. Everybody's family dynamic is going to be a little different. So I guess we should mention that a lot of these, and this one in
Mhm.
particular, is R-rated. But I don't feel like it would be necessarily an uncomfortable movie to watch with your parents. Uh, you know,
Yeah,
and
it
it's
would.
definitely it's gripping, and there's
Mhm.
enough humor to it. And I think maybe one of the better selling points is that it's incredibly tight. Like I would have
Mhm.
to check, but I think the runtime is probably like 90, maybe 100 minutes.
It's a short, tight little movie, but leaves with you with a big impact, and stuff. And so it's really a good one for like just distracting everybody in the
Yeah.
evening. So
Well, and I'm going to be really careful about spoilers here.
mhm.
We'll go ahead and continue this conversation without, I think, ruining any of these films. We really do want to encourage folks to be curious about some pretty great movies here.
Mhm.
But I'll say that there are definitely some tropes in this picture that turn something that are maybe turn on their head in a little way. Like the
Yes.
ending in particular, I think is one of those like headline like, oh Jesus, did they really do another movie with that shitty trope, but in a way that really works. And I think
Mhm.
there's so much about this movie that makes us question the way we think about maybe bar culture and about
Yeah.
good old boys and nice guys
Mhm.
and a lot there without really seeming preachy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one that is intriguing and goes for good discussions and stuff. And I'm the type of person who, after I watch a movie, will sit down and discuss it with you and be like, okay, so what about this scene and what about that scene and all that. So
Yeah, no,
yeah.
there's a lot to talk about here,
Mhm.
and I guess I'm curious how you feel about some of the violence in this picture because it feels like it's
Mhm.
tastefully done in some ways. I mentioned that even though we don't want to spoil anything, it's certainly a film that depicts violence against women in a way
Mhm.
that I think could veer into like some pretty exploitative, like cringy type of territory. But that wasn't my experience of this one.
Yeah, no, it really, I think part of it is because it's written and directed uh, by a woman and uses women throughout the directing and throughout the editing and stuff. It doesn't delight in the violence. It uses it as a like sort of thriller gripping trope, but it's not a movie where you feel like it's overindulging in that violence.
Yeah, fair to say. Well, I wanted to kind of throw out one of my own quickly, if I may. Was there anything else you wanted to make sure to touch on here?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, well, I wanted to maybe just very briefly mention the film Coda, which garnered a lot of attention last Oscar season, and this one would actually be perfect, I think, for kind of the whole family. There is some sexuality that is, I don't know if graphic is maybe the term I would use, but it's definitely noticeable. It comes in with a PG-13 rating, but the sex is played for laughs in a way that is really humanizing, I felt. Ultimately, this is a movie, of sort of a coming of age story about a young girl. She is the child of deaf adults, Coda, if you're not familiar with that term.
Yeah.
And it sort of explores not just the sexuality piece, but also working in and out of different forms of marginalization, different forms of sort of finding your own voice and some maybe subtle and perhaps not so subtle ways. It really brings some of that like cheese factor that you're maybe looking for in a good family film in a lot of ways. And I think would be a really good selection if you are looking for something that just doesn't have all of the cringe that we are kind of used to when we're looking to have like a more sex positive, more progressive view on things. I want to remind folks that we do have lines open, and we'd love to hear your take on a lot of these films, to maybe get some of your recommendations on what you feel like would be a good way to pass or even kill some time with family this year. But Dianna, while we're having this conversation, I guess I wanted to hear maybe what your thoughts or your experiences are kind of generally when it comes to some more like classic Christmas fare, because I think a lot of what we're doing here is wanting to just avoid having to sit through Miracle on 34th Street for the millionth time, as you know, the women are being sidelined, and as you know, the men are men, and you know, some of those like traditional tropes. And I guess just what it means to be returning year after year after year to some of this art that is part of our culture, and that I'm not like trying to cancel or erase or anything, you know, that a conservative boogeyman might make it out to be, but that is still perhaps problematic. I don't know. Do you have any anything you might add to that, or any thoughts there?
Yeah, it's interesting how like particularly like white American Christmas, like Christian culture, has developed this relationship with these movies from very specific time periods. Like, I think it's TBS does a 24/7 marathon of A Christmas Story.
Yeah.
And you kind of wonder, who is that for at this point? Because like it's 2021, that movie came out in what, the 80s?
Well, and not to mention anybody can watch that movie at any time on any number of platforms. Like, we don't necessarily need a network to just broadcast and rebroadcast it for us.
Yep. And so I feel like it started as a gimmick that they were doing, but now has become something of a Christmas tradition. And it's kind of this weird like cultural touchstone for that, where some families will just turn it on. Like my dad will just put on TBS during the day during that time. And it's very strange because you end up catching the movie at different times as you walk in and out. It sort of forms background noise, but it's when you sit down and actually watch some of these movies, they're not great movies, because they all depend on this like idea of like, well, everything will be made right when man and woman kiss at the end of the movie and everything's okay, and stuff. And it's like, that's tired, that's old, and stuff. And I'm just, we it's like we are watching these movies like It's a Wonderful Life over and over again without learning the lessons from the movies, or just only like taking them away at Christmas time of like, oh, this is a time when it's good to give and stuff, without ever actually landing back on that outside of the Christmas period. It seems like a way to just sort of make ourselves feel better.
Yeah,
and engaging with the nitty gritty,
the message of it. Yeah, and I can appreciate something of that sense of tradition. And you know, I can even make some excuses for older films. Like you were talking about A Christmas Story, and you know, the thing that jumps out for me, of course, is the scene at the Chinese restaurant, which is really not the best way I've ever seen Asian Americans depicted on film. There's definitely some concern there. Yeah. But I'm willing to, in certain ways, like give a pass to some of these things. We were talking with the crew before the show about the film Airplane, which is definitely a movie that I grew up loving, and that I maybe haven't seen it in a while, so perhaps I should hedge a bit in case it doesn't hold up quite as well as I think. But certainly I do know and remember that there are some scenes there that you wouldn't include in any sort of remake if you were going to do that movie again, and rightly so. I don't know that that means that the whole movie needs to be thrown into the bin. And I don't know that necessarily any of these movies that we're perhaps poking fun of need to be completely trashed. But there is something to be said about the way that we glamorize them and return to them over and over, even as those messages become increasingly not just stale, but rancid in many cases.
Yeah, I think of Love Actually, which is considered like an ultimate Christmas movie. It's about the 6 weeks leading up to Christmas. It's all about how Christmas is all around, and stuff, and how like that movie doesn't hold up all that much because it's very concentrated on straight couples. It's very, it's one that just to me doesn't resonate anymore in terms of like what it's trying to tell us about Christmas, because all the expressions of love within it are like these romantic love sort of things rather than like love between friends, things like
Familial,
that, or having, and it equates in a lot of ways love with sex, which is not necessarily a healthy message to be sending out there, and stuff, especially with like the ways in which like Alan Rickman's character is cheating on his wife, and that's like the big storyline for him and stuff, and how does that look like love? How does that how do we deal with that is a complicated question that I think the movie doesn't deal with properly and stuff. So when we're putting that on every Christmas, it's kind of like, well, what are we saying about other kinds of love that exist?
Taking that in over and over. Yeah.
Yep.
No, we actually did something of a deep dive on Love Actually last year. And cool. I do want to say that I enjoy that movie, but at least another piece of this is wanting to introduce something that is kind of fresh, and that doesn't necessarily entail just that idea of Christmas. I know it's kind of a little bit unfair to have this conversation about Christmas movies and then for us to come in with all of these movies that you could watch at really any time of the year. But as an atheist, I know that by the time like December 30th has rolled around, if I have to hear one more word about that goddamn kid freezing in the manger, my head feels like it'll explode. And I just get so exhausted of hearing about it.
Yeah, the Christmas season really tires me out in a lot of ways, and I feel that where like I will go get Chinese food on Christmas Day or something if I'm spending it alone, because I don't want to deal with Christmas dinner or whatever, those sorts of things and stuff. And it just gets tiring, and sometimes you just want something that is not Christmas themed to deal with. Because at this point, I went to the store this last weekend, and they were already playing Christmas music.
Oh,
I was
wow.
Like, it is
that's
November.
Bad form.
And stuff. So like at this point, we're dealing with it for like 3 months, and I get tired.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like a sensory processing issue or what, but even as a theist, just any form of repetitive music, and Christmas music certainly falls into that category, makes my brain just start to feel like it's melting after a certain period of time. So I do hope that if anybody is catching the podcast of this as they are, driving towards family or whatever else, that we can give you at least a little bit of break from all of that. I will say that this year on Thanksgiving, we will be doing an episode of Sexuality, and it is going to be rather spectacular.